What happens when the person who once belittled you is the one you have to save? For a 10-year-old black boy, this was the question he never thought he would have to face. But on one fateful day, that's exactly the situation he found himself in, when a racist doctor, who had constantly treated him like a second-class citizen, was caught in a dangerous chemical spill. Despite the doctor's previous disdain, the boy didn't hesitate for a second. He risked everything to pull the man out of harm's way. The very man who had belittled him for months was now depending on him for survival. But what happened next would leave everyone speechless. The boy's act of bravery would change not only his life, but also the doctor's perception of the world and everything he once believed in. It was just another normal day at a bustling hospital. The emergency department was buzzing with activity as nurses rushed between rooms and doctors examined their patients. In the heart of the hospital's laboratory, the air was filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic and the sounds of equipment beeping. The boy, an intern at the hospital's volunteer program, was busy running errands, eager to prove himself. He worked tirelessly, determined to learn as much as he could, though his presence often went unnoticed. He was just a kid, trying to make the most of an opportunity that others may have taken for granted. Meanwhile, the doctor, a middle-aged man in his 40s, strode around the lab, his nose held high in the air. He was a professional, confident in his expertise, but his demeanor was laced with arrogance. He often dismissed his colleagues, particularly the young intern, as if their hard work didn't matter. The boy had felt the sting of the doctor's harsh comments on more than one occasion. The doctor made it clear he didn't see the boy as worthy of his respect. It had been weeks of being ignored, belittled, and treated like a mere obstacle in the doctor's path. But the boy didn't let it stop him. He smiled politely, keeping his head down and focusing on his tasks. He had his eyes set on something greater, knowing that if he worked hard enough, he would earn the respect he deserved. He wasn't about to let anyone's prejudice derail his dream of making a real difference. That day, everything changed in an instant. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed throughout the lab. A chemical spill, an explosion of liquid and fumes, flooded the room in seconds. There was chaos everywhere as equipment flew, and the air turned thick with smoke and dust. The boy's heart raced as he heard the doctor's panicked voice calling for help. Through the chaos, he saw the doctor trapped, unable to move due to the debris blocking his path. The boy didn't hesitate. Without a thought for his own safety, he dashed forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The smoke and fumes made it hard to see, but the boy didn't let that slow him down. He could hear the doctor's labored breathing, and with all his strength, the boy pulled him from the wreckage, dragging him to safety. The weight of the doctor's body was heavy, but the boy refused to stop. His instincts kicked in as he shouted for help, but he didn't wait for anyone else. The boy was determined to save the man who had never once shown him kindness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stumbled out of the smoke. The boy collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. The doctor, still dazed from the explosion, slowly sat up, his eyes wide with shock. For the first time since they had met, the doctor looked at the boy, not as a nuisance or inferior, but as someone who had just saved his life. His face softened as he realized the gravity of what had just happened. He was alive because of the very person he had once looked down upon. The boy stood up, offering the doctor a hand, his expression calm but firm. "You're welcome," he said quietly, and with that, he turned and walked away. leaving the doctor to reflect on everything he had believed about race, privilege, and respect. The boy had done what he thought was right. He saved a life, even if it was the life of someone who had never once considered his worth. Later that day, the hospital staff praised the boy for his quick thinking, and word spread like wildfire. The boy's bravery had not only saved a life but had also opened the door for an unexpected transformation. The doctor, now deeply ashamed of his past behavior, would have to face the consequences of his actions. But it was the boy who had triumphed. His courage had shattered every assumption about race and power, leaving the doctor to wrestle with the true meaning of equality. The next day, the boy's life would change in ways he couldn't have predicted. What began as an act of bravery would soon turn into a turning point for both the boy and the doctor. A moment of courage had set the stage for something much bigger, one that would forever change the boy's future and the man who had once disregarded him. The boy's life has always been marked by a struggle to rise above the challenges placed before him. Raised in a modest home where every dollar was stretched to its limit, his family fought to make ends meet. Despite these hardships, his parents always stressed the importance of education as a means of creating a better future. They taught him that hard work and perseverance would open doors, even in the face of adversity. This lesson became his guiding principle. While others might have been disheartened by their circumstances, the boy chose to focus on what he could control, his education. For years, he dreamed of becoming a doctor, hoping to help people and make a difference in the world. He started volunteering at the local hospital, eager to gain experience and learn from the professionals around him. He understood that his journey wouldn't be easy. He was young, black, and coming from a background that many would view as a disadvantage. But his passion for medicine and helping others was unwavering. However, the hospital, while a place of healing, was not immune to the biases that permeated society. Despite his intelligence and dedication, the boy found himself constantly subjected to racism, particularly from some of the hospital staff. They saw him not as an aspiring doctor, but as an outsider who didn't belong. The most prominent of these figures was Dr. Harrison, a well-respected, middle-aged doctor with years of experience and a reputation for excellence. Dr. Harrison was good at what he did, but he was also deeply arrogant, with beliefs that were far from progressive. He often dismissed the boy's abilities, claiming that someone from his background couldn't possibly have the intellect or temperament to succeed in medicine. His condescending remarks were constant, and he rarely gave the boy the time of day, choosing instead to focus on his other, more qualified staff members. The boy, despite his desire to prove himself, felt the sting of these microaggressions every day. He heard the whispers behind his back, the subtle remarks about how people like him didn't belong in a hospital like this. When he would raise his hand to contribute to discussions, Dr. Harrison would either ignore him or brush him off, making the boy feel invisible. These constant reminders that he was seen as less than wore on him, yet he refused to let them break his spirit. Instead, he doubled down on his work, pushing himself harder to show that he could be just as competent, just as capable as anyone else. But the weight of it all wasn't easy to carry. Despite his resilience and drive, there were days when the boy wondered if his dream of becoming a doctor was too far out of reach. He knew that he had the potential to succeed, but sometimes it felt as if the world, especially people like Dr. Harrison, had already made up their minds about him. Still, he persisted. Every day he did his best, keeping his head down and focusing on what he could control, his actions, his education, and his dedication to learning. Meanwhile, Dr. Harrison's arrogance continued to grow. He had been in the medical field for years, and with that tenure came a belief that he was above questioning. His success had created a bubble around him, one in which he was surrounded by people who reinforced his biases rather than challenged them. He had little respect for anyone who didn't fit his idealized view of what a medical professional should look like. And the boy, with his youthful enthusiasm and humble background, was an easy target. Dr. Harrison's disdain was obvious, from his snide remarks to the way he treated the boy as if he were invisible. He took pride in the knowledge that he could belittle the young intern without facing any consequences. In his mind, he was justified. After all, he was the one with the degree, the experience, the success. The divide between them deepened with every passing day. The boy's attempts to prove himself were constantly stifled by Dr. Harrison's refusal to recognize his potential. Every time the boy worked harder to earn respect, Dr. Harrison knocked him down a peg, reinforcing the belief that someone like him could never succeed in the medical field. Yet, despite this constant dismissal, the boy held on to his dream. He knew that change wouldn't come easily, but he also knew that he had to keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles. He would never give up on the path he had chosen, no matter how many people tried to tell him he didn't belong. The lab was bustling with activity that day, as always. Researchers moved about, preparing chemicals, checking instruments, and exchanging data. The young boy, a 10-year-old intern, was learning the ropes, staying out of the way but eager to observe and help where he could. His days at the hospital were a blend of excitement and frustration. He dreamed of one day becoming a doctor, but the reality of being treated like an outsider was ever present. His only solace was that he could learn, work hard, and one day prove his worth to a world that seemed intent on keeping him down. Dr. Harrison, the senior doctor in charge, had long ignored the boy's presence, brushing him aside with every opportunity he got. He often made rude remarks, questioning the boy's intellect and ability to handle the work in the lab. Despite all of this, the boy never allowed the doctor's condescending attitude to affect his drive. His mother always told him that true greatness came from doing good, not seeking it from others. So he quietly carried out his duties, waiting for his time to come. That day, however, was different. As the doctor moved from station to station, managing the chemicals in his usual flippant manner, disaster struck. The container, holding a particularly dangerous substance, was knocked over, spilling its contents across the lab. Within seconds, the room filled with a thick, acrid smoke. There was no time to think. Chaos erupted as the other researchers scrambled to evacuate, but the doctor, now choking on the fumes, was stuck near the epicenter of the spill. His panicked movements only made things worse as he struggled to escape the danger. The boy, who had been near the door, immediately noticed the situation. Despite his fear, he didn't hesitate. He saw the doctor's distress, and something deep within him compelled him to act. This was a moment that required more than the bitterness of past interactions. It required courage and a focus on what was right. The boy didn't care that this same doctor had belittled him countless times. He only saw a person in need. Without thinking about the years of mistreatment or racial prejudice, the boy sprinted towards the doctor. As he reached the doctor, the boy grabbed him by the arm, pulling him away from the spill. The fumes were thick, and the fire extinguisher was nowhere near enough to contain the chemical cloud that had begun to spread. But the boy wasn't thinking of the risks. All he saw was the doctor, struggling to breathe and unable to move quickly enough to escape. He dragged him further from the toxic air, through the haze, his heart pounding. Adrenaline coursed through him as the smoke stung his eyes, but the boy pressed on. Finally, they made it to the door, out of harm's way. The boy, panting heavily, turned to check on the doctor, who was now standing but looking disoriented. His face was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. For a moment he stared at the boy who had just saved his life, with a stunned silence that seemed to stretch on for too long. The boy's actions, despite all the disdain the doctor had shown him, spoke louder than any words ever could. The boy had put aside the history of mistreatment and risked his life to save the one man who had treated him like nothing more than an inconvenience. At that moment, something shifted in the doctor's expression. The man who had once ridiculed this boy now found himself speechless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The boy, who had been dismissed time and again, had shown more character, bravery, and compassion than anyone could have imagined. The doctor opened his mouth to say something, but the boy was already walking away. The boy's actions had nothing to do with the doctor's past behavior, the prejudice he had endured, or the hurtful remarks that had been thrown his way. The boy wasn't thinking about any of that. His sole focus was on doing what was right. And in doing so, he proved that no matter how much disdain someone may have for you, your worth is not defined by their opinions. The hospital, once again calm after the chaos, continued its routine, but for the doctor, everything had changed. He stood in the hallway, still trying to process what had just occurred. His mind raced through the moments, his panic, the overwhelming smoke, and then the boy rushing to his side without hesitation. The doctor, too stunned to respond immediately, felt a wave of gratitude mixed with confusion and a deep sense of guilt. Here he was, a man who had always looked down on this young black boy, dismissing his potential, treating him as inferior. And yet, it was this very boy who had saved his life. The arrogance that had once defined the doctor's worldview now seemed utterly misplaced, and for the first time, he was forced to confront the ugliness of his own prejudice. As the hospital continued to clean up the aftermath of the spill, the boy quietly went about his business, his duty done. His focus remained steadfast. He didn't do what he did to gain recognition or praise, but because it was the right thing to do. As he left the scene, he overheard murmurs among the staff, the same staff who had witnessed the doctor's frequent condescending behavior. Word spread fast. They were all aware of the doctor's harsh treatment of the boy, of the racial slurs, of the constant dismissal. They had seen the boy endure it all in silence, but now things were different. The boy, unflinching in the face of danger, had risen above the negativity he had faced for so long. He wasn't just the quiet intern anymore. He was a hero. His bravery in the most trying of circumstances had proven his worth beyond any measure of education, skin color, or background. The doctor, meanwhile, was left with a sinking feeling. His entire career, built on years of success and power, had been rocked by the selflessness of a child he once dismissed. And as he processed the gravity of his earlier thoughts and actions, he began to recognize just how deeply wrong he had been. It wasn't just the fact that the boy had saved his life that bothered him. It was the realization that he had underestimated him from the very beginning. The doctor had spent years promoting the idea that success was determined by birth, by privilege, by pedigree. The very things he had mocked this boy for, his skin color, his humble beginnings, were precisely what made him stronger, more capable, more resilient. As news of the boy's heroism spread throughout the hospital, the atmosphere began to change. Staff members who had long been complicit in tolerating the doctor's behavior now had to face the uncomfortable truth. The boy they had witnessed being belittled and disrespected was the very one who had shown immense courage when it counted most. The realization was profound. His heroism had changed the way people saw him, and in turn, it forced them to rethink the behavior they had long tolerated. Whispers of admiration replaced the usual uncomfortable silences when the boy entered a room. Colleagues who had previously avoided interaction with him, or worse, ignored his presence, began to offer him nods of acknowledgement and respect. The staff realized that the boy wasn't just surviving in the face of adversity. He was thriving in it, and it was this resilience, this strength, that had made all the difference. Even those who had witnessed the doctor's harshest moments with the boy were questioning how they had allowed such behavior to persist. The staff began to openly discuss the issues of racism within the hospital, realizing that it was not just one individual, but an entire system that had allowed these biases to go unchecked. The boy's act of bravery had inadvertently ignited a conversation about institutional racism, and people were listening. The doctor, now forced to confront the impact of his actions, realized that the consequences of his treatment of the boy weren't just about his own personal growth. They were about the culture he had helped foster. The respect and dignity that the boy had shown him, even after everything, were the true lessons he needed to learn. As the doctor reflected on his past mistakes, he realized that a change had to come, not just within himself, but within the very system that had allowed his views to persist for so long. For the boy, his actions had proven that heroism doesn't come from titles or status, but from integrity, bravery, and the will to do what's right, even when no one expects it. His life was just beginning to shift, but it was clear that things would never be the same again. He had become the spark that ignited change, the catalyst for a broader conversation about respect, equality, and justice. As the dust settled and the hospital community began to reflect on the events, the boy's heroism became a powerful reminder of the importance of empathy and fairness, values that would now define the future of the institution. The doctor stood before his colleagues, the weight of his actions bearing down on him. In front of an assembly of staff members, he publicly acknowledged the boy's bravery and the role he played in saving his life. The doctor, his voice shaky but sincere, confessed to his long-standing racist actions and how they had influenced his behavior toward the boy. "I was wrong," he admitted, "and I can never undo the harm I've caused. But I'm here today to make things right." The room fell silent as the doctor continued, admitting to the biases that had shaped his perceptions and actions. It was a moment of reckoning, not only for him but for the entire hospital. The boy, standing nearby, felt a mix of emotions. He had always known his worth, but hearing the doctor's acknowledgement felt surreal. It was not the kind of validation he had hoped for. He had always believed that actions spoke louder than words. But even now, as he listened to the doctor's apology, the boy knew that this moment was significant. In the days following the apology, the hospital began to make visible changes. The boy, who had always been overlooked, was now a symbol of courage and professionalism. The hospital formally recognized his heroism, inviting him to speak at community events and rewarding him with scholarships to continue his education in medicine. His actions, undeniably brave and selfless, had become a catalyst for systemic change within the institution. The doctor, who had once viewed the boy with disdain, now found himself seeking his guidance. As part of his apology, the doctor made the commitment to mentor the boy, offering him opportunities that had once seemed impossible. He encouraged the boy to continue his medical studies, providing resources and advice that would help him navigate the often treacherous path of medical education. The boy's potential, once dismissed, was now acknowledged and nurtured, as the doctor worked to make up for the years of harm he had caused. The boy, still processing the magnitude of the situation, found himself in a position of power he had never imagined. What had once been an unequal relationship was now a partnership of sorts. The doctor's mentorship, though not perfect, was a step in the right direction. The boy continued to shine, his dedication to medicine and his work ethic surpassing even his own expectations. With the support of the doctor, who had turned from a symbol of racism into a mentor, the boy moved closer to his dream of becoming a doctor himself. The transformation did not stop with the boy and the doctor. The hospital, as a whole, began to shift. Staff members underwent mandatory diversity and bias training, and the leadership implemented new policies to ensure a more inclusive and respectful environment. The hospital's administration committed to holding every member of the staff accountable for their actions, ensuring that racism and discrimination would no longer be tolerated. The boy's heroism had sparked a much-needed conversation about racial equity and the importance of acknowledging systemic bias. What had once been a toxic environment was beginning to transform into one that valued and celebrated diversity. The boy's actions were no longer just a story of personal triumph. They were a powerful catalyst for change in the medical field, creating a ripple effect that reached beyond the walls of the hospital. As the hospital continued to evolve, so did the boy. He knew that his journey was far from over, and he remained humble in the face of his newfound opportunities. His goal was clear: to continue helping others and proving that resilience and kindness could transcend even the darkest of biases. What had begun as an act of bravery had turned into a lifelong mission to make a difference in the world. The doctor, on the other hand, faced his own journey of redemption. He worked tirelessly to make amends for the damage his previous actions had caused, not only to the boy, but to the countless others who had suffered from his prejudiced mindset. His transformation was slow, but with each passing day, he worked to dismantle the biases that had once defined his identity. In the end, the story of the boy and the doctor became a powerful example of how one moment of courage could change lives, both individually and collectively. The hospital's transformation reflected the broader societal changes that needed to take place to address systemic racism, and the boy's legacy became a symbol of the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter the obstacles. The boy's life had been irrevocably changed by one act of bravery, and so had the doctor's. What had once been a relationship built on ignorance and prejudice was now one grounded in respect and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. The transformation within the hospital was evident to everyone. Under the boy's quiet influence and the doctor's newly discovered commitment to change, the institution began to evolve into a model of progress. The leadership of the hospital recognized the need for transformation, and policies were quickly updated to reflect a commitment to diversity, racial equity, and inclusive patient care. No longer could bias and prejudice fester unnoticed. This new era of leadership would hold everyone accountable, regardless of their position. The boy, having proven his worth through his actions, now became a key figure in the hospital. After years of navigating a hostile environment, he was now poised to lead. Eventually, the doctor, in an effort to atone for his past and truly contribute to the cause of equality, voluntarily stepped down from his position as head of a department. The boy, now a young man, took his place. His leadership was characterized not only by his intellectual prowess, but by his deep compassion and a strong belief that the institution's purpose was to serve all individuals, irrespective of their race, background, or financial status. The boy, now wearing the mantle of responsibility, moved through the hospital halls with a sense of pride. His colleagues no longer saw him as a boy of lesser value, but as a leader capable of inspiring change. He was no longer dismissed as too young or too inexperienced. He had earned his place at the helm. His leadership was built on the foundation of equality, fairness, and an unrelenting desire to make the world a better place for everyone, particularly marginalized communities. The boy's story was no longer one of humiliation and struggle. It had become a tale of triumph, not just for him, but for the entire institution. He had overcome the prejudice that had once defined his experience, and in doing so, he had reshaped the future of the medical field. As he walked through the halls, seeing the faces of those who had once doubted him, he realized that his fight for equality was far from over. While he had made incredible strides, the boy knew that the battle for true justice would be ongoing. There would always be more to do, more people to help, more systems to reform. The work was never finished, and he was determined to continue pushing forward. His journey had only just begun. The final scene, however, wasn't defined by the boy's success in the medical field. It was marked by his unwavering determination to ensure that the hospital and the world beyond was a place where every person could succeed, regardless of their background. He recognized that his new role was not just about holding power, but about using that power to uplift others, to change the way the system operated, and to fight for a better future for all. True courage isn't just about saving lives. It's about changing hearts and minds along the way. The boy thought to himself as he walked down the corridor, knowing that every decision he made would ripple out, influencing not just the hospital, but the larger community and, ultimately, the world. His story had come full circle. What started as an act of saving a life had transformed not only the boy's future, but also the future of those around him. He had shown the world that one person, one brave act, could truly change everything.